The Early Days, 1893 to 1940, by Carolyn Norwood, in loving memory of George G. Norwood, who was always willing to help. Photo editor Andrew Clyde Little, graphic artist Betsy G. Atkinson. Copyright the Anna Maria Island Historical Society, 2003. The front cover is the Anna Maria City Pier, built in 1911 at the end of Pine Avenue. The pier was the hub of activity. Excursion boats docked and supplies came by boat to the 678-foot structure. On the back cover, the early beach strollers. This photograph was taken in the early 1920s. Note the gun the man was carrying. There were plenty of rattlesnakes on the island and a few wild animals. This picture was chosen to be the logo for the Anna Maria Island Historical Society. The Anna Maria Island Historical Society was formed in 1990 by Anna Maria residents Pat Copeland and Carolyn Norwood, both reporters for the Islander newspaper. Mayor Ray Simpkins gave them the idea. They knew something must be done to preserve island artifacts which were being lost. Soon more residents joined to support this goal. The nonprofit educational organization was incorporated in 1991. The mission of the group is to collect, research, preserve, and exhibit materials relating to the early days of Anna Maria Island. The educational program is of great importance, helping to preserve the heritage of this beautiful 7-mile jewel. Historical Society members visit schools, churches, and civic organizations to make the history of the island come alive to students. Each year the Society awards a scholarship to a graduating high school senior who plans to pursue a college education. Students in all county schools are encouraged to use the museum to research their history projects. The Society gives 2 awards every year to winners of the Manatee County History Fair in the Anna Maria Island category. A large library is available to the public in the museum. It's full of biographies of noteworthy island residents and scrapbooks covering the history of each of the 3 island cities. Also to be found are historical stories about fishing, churches, schools, and the environment. More than 100 videotapes feature conversations with old-timers recalling the past. These resources are the key to days gone by. Without the tapes and many books filled with newspaper clippings and pictures, our link with the past would be lost forever. AMIHS, Anna Maria Island Historical Society, now has about 200 members. Volunteers help in a variety of ways. They act as docents in the museum, which is open 4 days a week, year-round, except on holidays. They help with special events such as the Island Arts and Crafts Festival and the annual museum open house. They also man the well-stocked gift shop. Faithful bread bakers provide tasty early settler bread on Wednesdays during the season. Customers are usually waiting for the doors to open at 10 a.m. For 10 years, the Society staged a dinner and historical pageant based on facts gleaned from the museum. This was not a money-making project, but a way to get islanders together and bring the history to them in an entertaining way. One year, the play depicted the growth of Holmes Beach. It was performed twice, and more than 500 people saw it and enjoyed it. The Historical Society appreciates the use of an Anna Maria City building as its museum. Built in 1920 as an ice house, it has been used as city offices, an automotive garage, police and fire department headquarters, and the Turtle House. Meetings are held once a month on the 3rd Monday, unless otherwise specified, from September through May. Usually held in Anna Maria City Hall, the meetings are open to the public and start at 7:30 p.m. Speakers talk on a variety of subjects. Dues are $10 per person, paid annually. The museum is open Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. October through April, and 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Monday through September. Admission is free, however, donations are gratefully accepted. Proceeds from the sale of this book will go toward the Society's current project, the restoration of Belhaven. The cottage sat on pilings at the head of the Anna Maria Pier from 1920 to 1926. It served as an ice house and bait house, and then became a rental cottage. When the pilings rotted, the building fell into Tampa Bay. Bought for $125 by Lyman Christie, it was placed on a barge, floated around the North Point, into the Gulf, and brought up on land at Palmetto Avenue. Mr. and Mrs. Christie lived in it for a number of years. Belhaven sat at 109 Palmetto Avenue until the Historical Society saved it from destruction and moved it to the museum complex at 402 Pine Avenue in December 2001. Donations to the AMIHS building and scholarship funds are tax-deductible and gratefully accepted. Checks may be made payable to AMIHS, Post Office Box 4315, Anna Maria, Florida 34216. Three pictures follow: the Anna Maria City office in the old ice house, the fire department in the old ice house, and the Anna Maria Historical Society as it is now in 2003. Chapter 1: Indians, Explorers, and Shipwrecks. Scientists tell us that people have inhabited the southwest coast of Florida for as long as 12,000 years. About 4,000 years ago, the barrier islands formed along the coast created an incredibly productive estuarine ecosystem. This in turn resulted in the permanent settlement of archaic people who were attracted to the coast by the bountiful supply of fish and shellfish. These archaic people were the early predecessors of the Calusa Indians. By the time Ponce de Leon led the first documented Spanish landing party ashore near Sanibel Island in 1513, Calusa culture was thriving. Its people were divided into two distinct castes. Common people worked at tasks ordered by nobility. They provided food, dug canals, and labored at the construction of immense complex shell works and mounds like those that still exist on Mound Key today. A well-armed, highly structured military group defended the Calusa Reign. The Calusa Paramount, or king, was said to have supernatural ties to the heavens through which the day-to-day well-being of his subjects were assured. The Alusa are considered important by researchers because they achieved a remarkable level of complexity with the benefit of agriculture. As hunter-gatherers, they harvested their food from the rich southwest Florida estuarine environment. Although they eventually died out due to the introduction of European diseases for which they had no natural immunities, they succeeded in keeping their would-be Spanish conquerors at bay for almost 200 years. One significant Calusa Indian site is Mound Key State Archaeological Site, a 125-acre subtropical island in the center of Estigo Bay. Contained within its dramatic ridges, inland water courts, canals, and shell mounds are archaeological clues that reveal Mound Key has been inhabited for almost 2,000 years. Native Florida Indians, Spanish fisherfolk, 20th century Euro-Americans all made their homes there. Each group altered the landscape in its own way. Many scientists and researchers believe that Keymound was Kalos, the capital town of the Calusa Indians. Positions of the mounds and layout of the system offer support to this theory. All around the island, on shelled ridges and high spots, were houses of people who lived on this island. This information was obtained from the internet. There are many versions of who were the first inhabitants of Anna Maria Island. It was discovered by Spanish explorers about 1530. Conquistador Cabeza de Vaca described the Tocobaga Indians he found on the island at the time as strong, powerful fighters. The Tocobagans were weavers of fishing nets and baskets and experts in shellcraft and pottery. Their weapons included flint-tipped arrows and spears, war clubs, and flint-blade knives and axes. Tattooing was common among them. They used the juice of red and blue berries and gray charcoal dust, rubbing it into punctures made from thorns. According to Bill Bunger, local historian and anthropologist, 4 tribes used Anna Maria Island for fishing, hunting turtles, and camping, but not settling. There were the Tocobaga, Usita, Makoso, and Pui. These tribes inhabited the Tampa Bay area, but spoke 4 quite distinct languages. No burial mounds were ever found on the island. Midden sites were uncovered. These were piles of refuge left when the Indians broke camp. Joe and Libby Warner put forward another theory about the identity of the area's early inhabitants in their book, The Singing River. The Timucuans were found north of the Manatee River in St. Johns River, extending down to Cape Sable. The Timucuans were the predominant tribe from Manatee County. When the first Spanish arrived on these shores, it was estimated nearly 35,000 Indians lived in Florida. It is possible, but not proved, the Warrens write, that Hernando de Soto, with his entourage of ships and men, landed on the south side of the Manatee River on May the 25th, 1539, at what is now Shaw's Point or De Soto Point. The Timucuan Indians, who lived near the huge shell mound located on the landing site, came to meet the conquistadors as they stepped ashore. According to Spanish records, there were about 3,000 Indians living in the Tampa Bay area when they landed. In Ralph Hunter's book, From Calusas to Condominiums, he states that the Calusas were the predominant tribe in this area until about 1711. There are no traces of them today. They were exterminated, carried off by white men, or died from the white men's diseases. There are few stories about the island in the 18th century, but that changed in the 19th century. In Ralph Hunter's book, he recounts that in 1821, the pirate Jean Lafitte was shipwrecked and forced to spend time on Longboat Key. Some think Leftus Key, on the bayside south of Anna Maria Island, was originally called Lafitte's Key. No buried treasure was ever found there, but coins have reportedly been found on Bradenton Beach, Longboat Key, and Siesta Key. J. H. Harrison, Jr. of Palmetto, chairman of the Monument and Grave Marker Committee of the General Robert E. Lee Camp, Sons of Confederate Veterans, wrote a letter in 1985 to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. I was told by an old-timer around 25 years ago that in 1864 a federal fleet consisted of a tin-clad stern-wheel gunboat pulling 5 steam launches was sent to Tampa. When the fleet reached the mouth of Tampa Bay, a northwestern came up, blowing one of the steam launches into the stern wheel of the gunboat, making the latter uncontrollable. The whole fleet then washed ashore at the north point of Anna Maria Key, drowning all aboard. In the ensuing years, everything was covered with sand. The incident was forgotten until about 1890, when a man by the name of Bean, George Emerson Bean, who was the first island homesteader, dug several wells in the area looking for water for his home, which he built nearby. In all but one of the wells he found human bones and brass buttons. Some time after, he wrote to the War Department to find out if a disaster had occurred there, and was told about the incident. The War Department allegedly told him the disaster was kept secret during the Civil War for fear of hurting Union morale. It remained a secret until they told Bean about it. Harrison concluded, if this incident could be ascertained, perhaps a monument could be erected on the site by the Manatee County Historical Society of the Robert E. Lee Camp, number 1383, of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. If you have any information regarding this in your files, I would appreciate it if you would let me know. In 1867, a schooner, the James E. Price of New Orleans, was wrecked on Mullet Key, according to the book Tampa in the Civil War and Reconstruction by Cantor Brown, Jr. The men aboard barely survived, while the ship's cargo for local stores was lost. Shipwrecks of Florida by Stephen Singer mentions a steel barge and a three-masted schooner that sank 150 miles southwest of Egmont Key in 1911. Another source says she sank 53 miles south of Egmont. A steam tug caught fire and sank in 1912, 1 mile north of Longboat Key. Descendants of early Spanish conquistadors remained on Anna Maria Island well into the 19th century. Captain John R. Jones, writing in a Tampa newspaper in 1927, noted that they were on the island in the 1880s. They lived on the north point of the middle of the island, the Holmes Beach area, and North Bradenton Beach, where the old Spanish well was located. It should be noted, the captain writes, that fresh water can be obtained almost anywhere on this key at a depth of 10 to 12 feet, and these wells never run dry. Chapter 2. Early Settlers. The first homesteader was George Emerson Bean, who settled with his family near the North Point in 1893. Bean homesteaded a large tract of land from the North Point to Magnolia Avenue, where the Island Community Center sits today. His son George Wilhelm Bean and his associates developed the property, laid out the streets and sidewalks, built houses, and constructed a water system. One of Will's partners, Charles M. Roser, invested the money that he made when he sold his invention of the Fig Newton cookie to Nabisco for $1 million. There's a picture of George Emerson Bean, whose family built a home near North Point in 1893, on this page. Plans were formulated for the finest resort on the west coast of Florida. The developers built a dock at the end of Pine Avenue and a bathing pavilion where the Sandbar restaurant is now. A hotel provided meals for day trippers. Samuel Cobb and his wife Annie moved to the Manatee River in 1891 to survey a colony for Swiss settlers. When the colony broke up, they went to Tampa. In 1897, they met George Emerson Bean, who told them about beautiful Anna Maria Island. They moved to the island, and in 1897 became the parents of the first white child born on Anna Maria. They named her Anna Maria after the island. The Cobbs homesteaded 160 acres, where the Holmes Beach Shopping Center is today, and called it Cobb's Corners. In 1907, Sam Cobb, a seafaring man and a carriage builder, established the first business on the island. He built a marina on a 10-acre bayou and called it Cobb's Marine Ways. Captain John R. Jones, the third settler to arrive, took up land south of the Cobbs. He was captain of boats running between Tampa and Cuba and was authorized by the United States Department of Agriculture to establish an agriculture station on the island. He brought trees and shrubs from South America, India, and Mexico. Some of them, like the strange sausage tree, still grow on the island. There's a picture of George Wilhelm Bean, Will Bean, who's the son of George Emerson Bean, on this page. He developed the Anna Maria Beach Company in 1911. In 1901, Sam Cobb's brother, Rurik, established a homestead further south on the island, on the bay where a trailer park is today. He platted a Lexhurst subdivision, named after the tropical evergreen Ilex. In 1901, there were no telephones, electricity, or bridges on the island. The only phone available for islanders was at the military base on Egmont Key. Rurik met Jack Leffenwell, a young entrepreneur who rigged the first telephone lines in Manatee County in the early 1900s. They formed a partnership and brought a line to Anna Maria Island. As they worked, they spoke of building a bridge to the island. In 1922, Leffenwell completed the first link between the island and the mainland. Constructed of wooden planks, the bridge ran from Cortez to Cortez Beach. Cortez Beach later became Bradenton Beach. In 1906, Rurik's homestead was proved up. This meant he gained title to nearly 160 acres. 3 years later, he built the island's first resort lodge on this acreage. The 3-story wooden structure afforded excellent views of the Gulf, and both ends of the island was visible from the spacious verandas. The Gulf Park Hotel flourished. Later, people could drive their cars along the wide expanse of beach. Gasoline-driven pumps supplied fresh water to the hotel from a well. Shower stalls were provided on the first floor for swimmers. There's a picture of Annie and Sam Cobb on this page. Anna Maria Cobb recalled, "Mosquitoes were thick, day and night, but fish were plentiful. All you had to do was drop your hook in the water to catch one." There was also an abundance of wildlife on the island in the early 1900s. Deer, rabbits, raccoons, gophers, and rattlesnakes abounded. Once, while walking on a secluded path, Anna Maria and her brother were frightened by a panther. They jumped in their boat and rowed home as fast as they could. Alligators lived in the bayous. The Cobbs stayed with the Mary Bean Hall family while their house was being built. When a house was raised, all the island men turned into carpenters. The Cobbs built a 2-story, 4-room house. Nearby, a 4-room house was built for the Moreau family. They built the Mora family Mora house so that Mama wouldn't be alone, explained Anna Maria. Mama was from New Jersey and had never experienced anything like life on an island. She soon learned how to hitch a horse to a wagon, row a boat, and shoot the raccoons that killed our chickens. She was a good shot and also killed rats that invaded our house. I watched her shoot one that was racing along a beam in the dining room. Papa had to keep putting new shingles on the roof because of the bullet holes. There's a picture on this page of Wilbur H. Hall. He married Mary Bean, the daughter of the first settlers. They came to the island in 1898, just before her father died, to prove up the family homestead. Frank Palmer of Hillsborough County secured a U.S. parcel of land for the part of Anna Maria Island bounded on the south by Longboat Pass and on the east by Palmasola Sound and the west by the Gulf of Mexico. On April the 7th, 1905, Palma filed for a plat of land known as Westview. There were 61 lots with streets. On the Gulf was a bathhouse and a pavilion. Many lots were sold to people in Tampa. This was likely the first established island summer resort on the west coast of Florida. Tampa families would leave early in the morning for Anna Maria Island. At the Alafia River, a barge would ferry them to the fishing village of Cortez. From there, they took another boat to Anna Maria. If they arrived on the island before sundown, they were lucky. Chapter 3. How Anna Maria got its name. Anna Maria Island was named and charted before Florida became part of the United States. On the old Spanish maps, the picturesque 7-mile strip of land bounded by the Gulf of Mexico, Tampa Bay, and Sarasota Bay was marked Anna Maria Cay, A-N-A-M-A-R-I-A-C-A-Y. There were several versions of how the island got its name. One story was that it was named in honor of Mary, the mother of Christ, and her mother, Anne. According to an early historian, the Latin nations were accustomed to giving sacred names to many places discovered and settled, established by them. For example, Tampa Bay is noted on the old maps as Espiritu Santo, Holy Spirit Bay. In another version of the story, one of the first Spanish explorers is said to have named it after his mother, Anna Maria. Florida marine historian Al Robson, who arrived on the island in 1944, made a search of the National Archives in Washington. The first map he found with the name of Anna Maria Key was an official United States map of 1848 based on an 1842 survey. Robson claims the island received its name from government surveyors who were staying with Madison Post in Tampa while surveying this part of the coast. Post became the third mayor of Tampa. Mrs. J.B. Johnson, granddaughter of Post, told Robson, "The surveyors offered to name the island for my grandfather, but he suggested naming it for his wife, Maria, and she suggested including her sister Anna, so they put the name Anna Maria on their charts." Robson explained that both women were Scottish, and they pronounced the name Maria as Mariah. One of the 1894 island homesteaders, Captain John R. Jones, got the name on the federal records so the city of Anna Maria could have a first-class post office. Jones, an Irish sea captain and attorney, explained the Spanish connection in a brief history of the island that he wrote in 1927, entitled Anna Maria Key, Historical Sketch of Gulf Island, written by one of its first settlers. It's the only published history of the island until now. It was not until 1943 that Washington, D.C. made the name official. When Northerners came to Florida after World War II, they made fun of the way some of the locals pronounced the island's name. According to Robson, the Women's Club of Anna Maria Island changed the pronunciation from Mariah to Maria in 1948. Here's an illustration of the difference of opinion between the island newspaper editor, Harry Varley, and a longtime realtor, Francis Livingston. "The sunshine is hot and life is much freer for all of the tourists on Anna Maria. But to the crackers, let yell the town crier. They'll bask in the sunshine of Anna Maria." That's by Francis Livingston. "How Gounod would hate it if in the church choir the soloist warbled it, Ave Maria." That's by the editor. On this page is Colton's map of 1855. It's the Lewis and Clark Explorer's map showing Mullet Key, Egmont Key, Anna Maria Key, the Manatee River, and Long Key, which we know as Longboat Key. Chapter 4. First Island Brochure Promotes Island Beaches. In 1911, after a pier was built at the foot of Pine Avenue, the Anna Maria Beach Company printed a brochure promoting the island. The brochure was alluringly illustrated with a fully clad Victorian bathing beauty. It read, "Island resorts on the coast of Florida are the most beautiful parts of the state, and Anna Maria Beach is the most attractive of these. Our development work has hardly begun. Visit the beach and see the place destined to become Florida's resort city, Anna Maria Beach, the greatest year-round resort city in Florida. The brochure told about and pictured one of the deep-flowing wells. Anna Maria Beach has 4 wells with combined capacity of more than 2 million gallons daily of pure flowing artesian water. The water is slightly sulfur, understatement, but is very pleasant to the taste, exaggeration, and contains medicinal properties which makes it adaptable to people suffering from stomach, bladder, and kidney problems. It's also a mild laxative. From these wells, a large pipeline has been laid throughout the entire property and is connected into all of the cottages, making this health-giving water accessible to all. A bank failure in Tampa triggered the collapse of the Anna Maria Beach Company. In the words of Marion Coleman, granddaughter of the first settler, George Emerson Bean, a few people came and stayed and worked hard to build it up, but the big island resort was not to be at that time. Shortly after World War I, the famous Florida boom erupted. Many attribute its early success to the automobile. As things picked up, residents of Anna Maria Beach decided to incorporate, which they did in July of 1923. This allowed electricity to come to the entire island. At that time, according to Miss Coleman, many improvements were undertaken, such as dredging the bayou, paving many streets with shell, and building ice plants. Electricity came to the island after Anna Maria City was incorporated. Another bust was followed by a depression. It wasn't until after World War II that the building boom on Anna Maria Island materialized. Later, residents outlawed high-rise buildings and duplexes on the island. They didn't want Anna Maria to become another Miami Beach. Chapter 5. Cortez Beach becomes Bradenton Beach. In 1917, about 30 people lived in a settlement called Cortez Beach, located at the southern end of Anna Maria Island. The Bayside Inn, today's Bridge Tender Inn, was built in that year by Old Man Stafford. It offered home brew, moonshine, slot machines, gambling, and 2 rental rooms. Below Stafford's quarters was a sundry store with ice cream, candy, pop, and canned food. This was the first commercial venture in Cortez Beach. They served a clientele of fishermen, a few retirees, boat people, visitors, and many characters who often spent time at the inn. There's a picture on this page of crowds gathering at the beach, which says, after the bridge linking Cortez Beach to the mainland was built in 1922, people from far and near gathered at the Cortez Beach, especially on weekends. Going on. Where 4th Street South is now, there was a public landing dock that accommodated stern-wheelers and side-wheelers that came weekly from Tampa with supplies, mail, and sightseers. Each islander had his own dock and boat, since all the transportation was over the water. The bridge from Cortez to Cortez Beach was completed in 1922. Cortez Beach soon became the commercial center of the island, just in time for the Florida boom and Prohibition. By 1927, Cortez Beach had a population of 75. There was a village store, a gas station, the Bayside Inn, the bathhouse, and the popular Pagoda Dance Hall. Among the many characters, there were carpenters, bookkeepers, bootleggers, and ladies of the night. The bathhouse was on the Gulf Beach at the end of Bridge Street. Admission was charged for use of the changing rooms, and you could even rent a bathing suit. Lockers and lounge chairs were also provided. South of the bathhouse stood the huge Pagoda Dance Hall. People were charged to dance and be served setups for the rum, homebrew, and moonshine they brought from the locals. Weekends and holidays, as many as 400 Model Ts a day would cross the bridge from 4 surrounding counties, since Cortez Beach had the only bathhouse and dance hall on the Midwest coast of Florida. And on this page, there's the West View. In the early 1920s, a settlement known as Westview was located at the southern end of the island, and in this photograph is one of several docks at Westview. Going on. This was the heyday of Cortez Beach. Al Capone stayed in Cortez at the Albion Inn in 1928 amid the rumors of his arranging for illegal rum to go to the Midwest from Cuba. The south end of Cortez Beach was discovered to have one cask after another of stacked cases of rum covered by old tarps waiting for nightfall and anonymous smugglers. In the late 20s, a Bradenton Herald reporter, Francis Wartig, who later became the mayor of Anna Maria City and postmaster, said, "Some of the prominent people in Bradenton bemoaned the fact that they had no beach, such as those in Clearwater, St. Petersburg, and Miami. I said to the news editor, Bugs Ramsey, let's give 'em a beach. I told him my plan. Instead of reporting from Cortez Beach, I headed all my stories and news Bradenton Beach. He was doubtful, but said if I stuck out my neck, he would publish my stories under the new heading. From then on, all the news south of Alexhurst was headed Bradenton Beach. North was Anna Maria. The southern part of Bradenton Beach was named West View." On this page is a picture of a trailer park taking shape. The carnival workers have set up winter quarters across from the Gulf Park Hotel in Bradenton Beach, which this became the Gulf Trailer Park in the early 1940s. Nothing much happened until one day I was accosted by an irate gentleman. He shook his fist in my face and shouted, "This is Cortez Beach. It's not Bradenton Beach, and here's the map to prove it." I persisted, and as time went on, it was accepted. This reporter's impression is that the community had a right to its own name and shouldn't be the tail of the dog of either Cortez or Bradenton. Eventually, the Bradenton Chamber of Commerce passed a resolution to name the city officially Bradenton Beach. Whether they had the authority or not is of no consequence. The Pines Trailer Park was formed from 1929 to 1930. It was located at the foot of the bridge, just where it is today. Farmers from the north came, rented space, and lived in their trucks. Some stayed and others visited. It was the beginning of the national tourist invasion. Later, in the early 30s, the Gulf Trailer Park was started by carnival workers wintering in Florida. The local boom created by the Prohibition era continued until liquor became legal in 1934. At that time, the island saw the slow, steady influx of tourists and retirees coming through Bradenton Beach to settle or visit Anna Maria Island. Bridge Street developed into a bustling commercial area. Since every automobile entering town had to be driven down the street, it became the economic center of the island. In December of 1921, the following blurb appeared in the Manatee River Journal. Mr. and Mrs. Paul Gilmore are spending time at their home on Anna Maria Key. Mr. Gilmore is enthusiastic about starting a moving picture studio on the Key, and from now on will devote most of his time perfecting his plans. He spent time with an engineer making plans to re-subdivide the southern end of the island, where a development called West View had been started in 1903. He will widen the streets and make the main thoroughfare one of the most attractive streets in any motion picture city. Mr. Gilmore said that Florida was destined to become the movie picture center of the nation. He further said California had been shot to pieces, and Florida presented virgin field, heretofore neglected, but was fast coming to the front. The new bridge and road have made Anna Maria Island a place where all are more content to live, the Manatee River Journal editorialized on November the 23rd, 1923. The state of contentment did not last. The Depression, in addition to the storms of 1926 and 1928, put an end to the Florida boom and shattered the grandiose dreams of movie producer Paul Gilmore and many more entrepreneurs like him. On this page, there's a picture of a family outing with families from Bradenton who had driven over the bridge after it was built in 1922 to enjoy the sun and surf. They are dressed in the bathing costumes of 1922. Chapter 6. Bridge links Anna Maria to Longboat Key. In 1926, a bridge was built to connect the southern end of Anna Maria Island to the northern end of Longboat Key. Although there's still some suspicion that the first automobile to traverse the bridge was ticketed for speeding by an overzealous Longboat Key policeman. That was not actually the case. A month after the Longboat Bridge was completed, a killing hurricane swept up from Miami, smashed across Lake Okeechobee to buffet Longboat Pass and the bridge. 6 years later, on the nights of March the 5th and 6th in 1932, after nearly 2 weeks of constant southwest winds, a storm swept in on a full moon tide. Whether it was a storm or a tidal wave that caused the bridge to wash out isn't known. But shortly after midnight, the wooden bridge was literally lifted off its pilings and swept northeastward into the bay, splitting it in half. On this page, there's an aerial view of Bradenton Beach, Longboat Key, and Cortez, showing a few houses and one bridge to the mainland in about 1946. And at the top of the next page is a high wire act where the Carl Wallendaw was hired by a group of promoters to raise money for a bridge to cross Longboat Pass. Everyone had a good time, especially the men who absconded with all the money the next day. That was 1946. Bradenton realtor Walter Hardin rode out the storm in a boat at anchor over Jewfish Hole off Jewfish Key. It was some storm, he recalled. When we woke up the next morning, there was the Longboat Key Bridge out in the bay, not far from where we were anchored. If we hadn't anchored over a deep hole, we might have been hit by the bridge. The pilings of the old bridge could be seen for years beneath the waters of Longboat Pass. Remnants of the bridge parts that grounded north of Jewfish Key were eventually towed by tugboat to Sned's Island on the Manatee River, where it was resurrected as the old Humpback Bridge and used to bridge the Cutoff Canal between Sneed's Island and Palmetto. It was decided to leave the Longboat Bridge there because there were more people living on Sneed's Island than on Longboat Key. The storm did more than wash out the bridge. It finished off the flourishing summer and winter seasons of the Westview Resort. Gulf waters gorged open a breach, cutting off Westview from Bradenton Beach, a quarter of a mile north of the pass, while sweeping across the south point and destroying all the cottages and Westview's famed water toboggan slide. There was an abortive depression effort to build a toll bridge, but Longboat Pass was to remain unbridged for the next 26 years until the present span was completed in 1958. Chapter 7. No hurricanes, but bad storms. Hardy early settlers on Anna Maria Island refused to acknowledge the existence of hurricanes. To them, they were just bad storms or unsettled weather. Mrs. Mary Hall, whose father, George Emerson Bean, built the first house on the island, remembered as a child that her father brought the family from Tampa by boat for picnics. When they homesteaded in 1893, the only other residents were 3 bachelors who had campsites. Her daughter Bertha quipped, "It's always been strange to me, so many bachelors came down here. I don't know what for." Her grandfather, G.E. Bean, erected a 12-room house and put out a dock. The Mistletoe fishing steamer, owned and run by John Savarez, used to land at the dock 2 or 3 times a week in trips between Tampa and Hunters Point, which is now Cortez. Lumber to build the house was brought on a big schooner from Tampa. On this page is a picture that says, "Storms in the past have inflicted damage on the island, mainly due to flooding. Over the years, a few houses have been swept into the Gulf. The worst was the hurricane of October 1921, when the entire island was under water. Next page, high winds and rough seas. Island residents are shocked to see a great deal of erosion after violent storms. Many beach cottages and shops are damaged by rising water. And it shows high water around a market, which doesn't tell where that market is. Mrs. Hall said in an interview with a local reporter, "I remember well the storm on September the 8th, 1900, when Galveston, Texas was blown away. 5,000 people lost their lives in that storm. We had a northeastern wind on the island which drove the water out. High tides came with southwest winds," she said. "We knew when we were going to have high tides because of the direction of the wind. My father would put rollers under the house, hitch up the horses, and move it back from the water. Our house was moved back 3 times. They never left the island because of a storm, but weathered out the worst of them." Mrs. Hall's daughters, Miriam and Bertha, anxiously awaited the calm so they could search the beach for new shells and marine life that the rough waters carried in. "We never heard the word hurricane," Miriam said. "We wouldn't have known what one was. When we were growing up, they called it unsettled weather." In 1906, the Halls left the island for Tampa so the children could go to school. There was a terrible storm. A ship carrying lumber was forced to jettison its cargo. After the storm, all you could see was lumber for miles floating in the water. As it washed ashore, islanders gathered it up and built homes. In 1911, the Mistletoe steamer, which had been stopping at George Bean's dock since 1895, sank in Tampa. It was recovered, restored, and used for years before it sank again, for good. As I've already noted, the hurricane of 1921 damaged the almost completed Cortez Bridge. This slow-moving storm took 10 days to pass from the Yucatan Straits across the Gulf to Florida. By the time the telegraph warnings reached Cortez, it was too late. It toppled trees, drove giant waves onto the island beaches. The waves were huge in the bay. Water rose and began to flood the community of Cortez. Sally Fulford Moore remembered looking out of the second-floor window and seeing Brown's grocery store fall into the water. It was swept against the wooden bridge being built from Cortez to Anna Maria. The north point of the island was washed away, and Passage Key was gone. There were 80-mile-an-hour winds and gusts up to 100 miles per hour. Old-timers laughed when new residents expressed fright at the storms. "We used to have hurricane parties," one said. "Now, with early warnings, there's no reason anyone should stay on the island if it's in danger. Evacuations are lifesavers." And on this page, there's a picture of owners of a house directly on the Gulf have reason to worry when tides are high and a storm hits. One hurricane skirted the island in the early morning, hitting a few homes and toppling some Australian pines and palm trees. It looks as though it also caved in a roof. Chapter 8. Man and Dog Drown When Barge Sinks. For more than 50 years, when you drove down Gulf Drive in Bradenton Beach, you could see the remains of the old molasses barge protruding out of the water about 150 yards offshore. It was a favorite spot for scuba divers. Now it's no longer visible due to the restoration of the beaches. On March the 8th, 1940, the Gulf was churned up by a late winter storm and a powerful northwest wind. A Cuban tugboat, the Manila, with a converted tanker, the Regina, in tow, was on its way from Havana to New Orleans with 350,000 gallons of molasses when it ran into trouble between Longboat Key and Anna Maria Island. The two vessels were separated by the heavy seas, and the tug took off for safer waters, leaving the Regina's crew to fend for themselves. According to news reports from those who watched the 300-foot steel frame being pounded against the sandbar, the crew didn't fare too well. People from the mainland and the islands soon heard about the disaster and swarmed across the bridge to the spot where the Bradenton Beach Resort was located. We have a picture here of about 300. The word got around about the 300-foot tanker Regina sinking off the 900 block of Gulf Drive, and many, many islanders have swarmed to that corner to see what they can see. No one did anything very constructive except to notify the Coast Guard station in St. Petersburg. The Coast Guard didn't have the helicopter at that time, but they dropped life preservers and supplies to the stricken crew. Barney Barnett and 4 young men decided to try to get a lifeline or a small boat out to the barge after it broke in two. One of the men, Clayton Adams from Cortez, later received an award for his heroism. It took hours of exhaustive attempts to reach the half-sunken craft in the 8 to 12-foot waves that pounded the beach. The temperature plunged into the 40s and later that night into the 30s. The water turned brown with leaking molasses. Just before the men reached the boat, the cook, Severino Canizares, attempted to swim to shore. He was followed by the ship's mascot, a German shepherd. They were the 2 casualties that were found washed up on shore the next day. Adams and his friends had not been there too long when 2 other members of the ship's crew jumped into the water and attempted to swim to shore. They weren't making much headway and looked like they would drown, Adams remembered. I was about 18 and a real good swimmer, so I volunteered to swim out and help them. My friends brought up a rope and tied it to my waist. I dove in and swam out to them. I grabbed one man by his jacket and the other man held onto the rope. People on shore pulled us in. Boy, was it ever cold. I was freezing when I got out of the water, Adams recalled. A deputy sheriff on the beach at the time recalls how the water was filled with brown globs of molasses for months, and it washed up on the beach. An island woman said her hair would get messed up with a sticky brown goo every time she went swimming. During World War II, they tried to salvage some of the steel from the hull. For years, the single protrusion sticking out of the water was a roost for the cormorants, the seagulls, and the pelicans. Remains of the twisted hull became heavily encrusted with barnacles and other marine life. It was fun for skin divers, but a hazard for small boats, many of which ripped their hulls on the jagged remains near the surface. A group of interested islanders is trying to get the submerged wreck declared part of the Florida Shipwreck Preserve. A survey is planned by the Florida Bureau of Archaeological Research. Lorraine Athos, co-owner of Sea Trek Divers in Bradenton Beach, said if it becomes a state preserve, a permanent marker will be placed above the Regina so that the exact location will be known by divers, snorkelers, and boats. If boats go to the site, they'll be able to tie up to the marker or stay away from it, but not drop anchor. This page also has a picture of the wreck and the attempted rescue. Section 2, Island Landmarks. On this page is a picture of the beach bathhouse located where the Sandbar restaurant is today. The bathhouse was a popular spot for day trippers. They would leave excursion boats at the city pier and walk up Pine Avenue to the beach. Chapter 9, the Gulf Park Hotel. One of the first large buildings on the island was the Gulf Park Hotel in Bradenton Beach. The builder was Rurik Cobb, known as Professor Cobb. He was a band leader in the Army for several years and visited Anna Maria while stationed in Tampa about the time of the Spanish-American War. After leaving the Army in 1901, Cobb moved to the island and homesteaded a site of land that he later subdivided into what became known as the Alexhurst subdivision. With financial assistance from a Mr. Zawadski, who acted as Cobb's personal savings and loan association, he built the hotel and called it the Clubhouse. At the same time, a long pier was constructed out to the boat canal in the bay. There's a picture on this page of the Gulf Park Hotel. According to Cobb's niece, Anna Maria Cobb Riles, The clubhouse was a three-story wooden building with a huge veranda encircling the second floor. The third story was gabled with dormer windows. It was a very handsome building, she said. Shower stalls were on the first floor, and a huge dining room was on the second floor. Sleeping rooms were on the third floor. The clubhouse was the largest building on the island with a view of the Gulf at both ends. German Americans would come for the weekends or vacation, Mrs. Riles said. They were businessmen and had plenty of money and time to spend on the island. The Germans had phosphate business interests in Central Florida and ties in Tampa. Cobb persuaded them to back him in his resort dream. In the early 1900s, there was no bridge and everything had to be brought to the island by boat or barge. Cobb and his friends built a 1,000-foot pier from the hotel to Anna Maria Sound. Later, an 11-passenger motorboat brought guests from Tampa. The number of patrons at the hotel and prospective purchasers of lots in the new subdivision was limited. In 1914, at the onset of the war, the Germans went home. Cobb's project was not a success, and in 1915, Zawadzki foreclosed the mortgage on the property. The hurricane of 1921 whipped across the island, destroying the pier, but the clubhouse stood firm. About the time the Cortez Bridge was opened in 1922, Zawadzki sent Frank Farrell to the island to manage the property, including the clubhouse. However, because of few residents and visitors on the island, the project was not much more successful than it had been under Cobb's management and ownership. Between the end of the Florida boom in the 1920s and the Depression of the 1930s, not much was happening at the hotel until the end of World War II. About 30 Coast Guard men stayed there while they were assigned to beach patrol. At that time, Mr. and Mrs. Zawadzki were operating the hotel and feeding the men. In 1945, Dick and Betty Dodge leased the property. They later purchased it and operated a restaurant on the premises. The same year, Gerald Kirsch, a British foreign correspondent, stayed at the hotel and published the island's first newspaper. It was a one-issue publication. In addition to running the hotel, the Dodges developed a trailer park across the street. Other accounts say that Mrs. Zawadzki started the Gulf Trailer Park across the street from the hotel to cater to the revival of tourism and winter visitors. She changed the name of the hotel to Gulf Park Hotel. Originally, the building had a large room for general use on the first floor, a ballroom on the second, and on the third floor were 12 large bedrooms. Several baths where fairly modern facilities were installed. In 1950, two men leased the hotel to build a modern restaurant. Their primary business was through the bar. In 1954, the Dodgers sold the hotel and trailer park to Jim Templin of Michigan. Soon there was a barber shop, sandwich shop, ice cream parlor, grocery store, and a bar. In 1960, the third floor was condemned and removed. A flat roof took its place. In 1972, Templin sold the property to Bill Britt and Gerald Vorbeck. The ground floor bar business picked up and catered to the younger set. With young people came motorcycles, drinking and loud music, an annoyance to residents of the trailer park, and a nuisance to city officials. Mayor Richard Connick threatened to close the bar. He had complaints of vandalism, violation of fire codes, illegal parking, and loud noise. For a while it became the Orr House and mysteriously burned to the ground one night in 1979. This is the end of this side of this tape. Chapter 10. The City Pier. 3 years after the George Emerson Bean arrived on the island, a small town arose from the jungle. George, his son Will, and their associates formed the Anna Maria Beach Development Company and transformed the family's property. Soon there were 60 homes, a hotel, bathing pavilion, bathhouse, church, school, post office, and several stores. To attract rich people from Tampa and St. Petersburg, Will had a dock constructed at the foot of Pine Avenue in 1911. It ran 777 feet out into the deep waters of Tampa Bay. This enabled steamers to make daily stops. Tourists came by the hundreds to frolic on the pristine Gulf beaches. Bean dressed his 10-year-old daughter in a black and white bathing costume. She cruised around the steamers in a little red boat greeting visitors. At the foot of the pier, he stocked a gift shop with shells, sea creatures, and island mementos. Will persuaded his sister, Mary, to stand on the dock in gypsy garb and tell fortunes to the day trippers. On these pages there are some pictures. There's a 1948 anglers flocked to the city pier. Mackerel was thick. Note the cane poles. Every time an angler threw a line in, up came a mackerel. And on the next page, fish for dinner. The family members posed at the end of the pier with their catch of the day. Fishing was fun for all ages. The fish are large. As the happy visitors paraded up Pine Avenue to the Gulf, they passed Will Bean's cottage. They couldn't miss the flock of colorful peacocks strutting around a pond where a fierce alligator lurked. In the early 20s, Captain Mitch Davis built 2 houses on the end of the pier. The house on the north end of the wharf was built for a Tampa banker, John Trice. Named the Lotus Cottage, it was 79 feet long and had 4 bedrooms. Each had its own bath. The small house on the right has a curious history. Captain Davis built this as an ice house for J.B. Johnson before there was a bridge to the island. He stored ice to sell to island residents. That didn't last for long, then the place became a fish canning plant. That failed, and Davis rebuilt it as a rental unit owned by Charles Roser. It was named Belle Haven. A man was living in it when one night it fell into the bay. Luckily, the man swam out the window. According to Mitch Davis, the pilings on the 2 houses had rotten away. They said a storm carried them away, but it was procrastination that took them down. They didn't take care of those pilings, and the worms ate them. The houses rode out the worst hurricane to hit the island in 1921. During the storm, I carried off a frail man who was living in the Lotus Cottage. His daughter thought that he would surely blow away. The city of Anna Maria acquired the pier in 1928. Maintenance was always a problem, and the Work Projects Administration, part of President Roosevelt's New Deal, was used during the 30s to make necessary repairs. The pier has sentimental value for old-timers, but it's been a constant headache for city commissioners over the years. Patching it and replacing pilings have taken a sizable percentage of the city's budget. On this page, there's a picture of the end of the pier, and it's covered with fish. They say it's covered with fish every day. One could see hundreds of fish thrashing about in the crystal clear water. There's one lady dressed in her Sunday best. Chapter 11. The first church on the island. A few scattered, sun-bleached cottages, homes of hardy pioneers, dotted the shoreline of Anna Maria Key in 1911. But soon after that, a bit of activity started on the 7-mile spit of land. Vacationers discovered the pristine white beaches. The pier accommodated steamers from Tampa and St. Petersburg. The dense jungle was cleared. Cottages with gardens sprang up. cisterns collected rainwater for each family. Charles Roser was a member of a visionary Anna Maria Beach Company. Before arriving on the island, he and his father established a large candy and cracker manufacturing firm in Ohio. The star attraction was the famous cookie, the Fig Newton. It was such a winner that the National Biscuit Company bought the recipe for $1 million in 1910. Rosa was only 47. One day he discussed the possibility of building a church on the island with his father, John M. Roser, retired and living in St. Petersburg. While sitting and dreaming on the porch of his cottage, which still stands at 509 Pine Avenue, the senior Roser had a vision. A voice asked, "Why wait until you are dead? Why not live to see your good intentions performed?" He was so moved that he resolved to build the church on the expanse of land across the street. On these 2 pages, there's a picture of Caroline Roser and John Roser, and it's dated 1910. And there's a picture of Roser Church, built in 1913. It says the original Roser Chapel is still used today for special events, weddings, and funerals. This article appeared in the St. Petersburg Time-Independent on May 15, 1913. Mr. Roser lost his wife last summer and plans to erect a memorial appropriate to the love and esteem to which he held her. He had not been able to decide what until he looked over Anna Maria Island and saw the need for a house of worship. The church will be a memorial to his wife Caroline. It will not be given to any denomination, but it will be a union house of worship. Captain Mitch Davis was chosen as the contractor. The cost was $3,100 in cash. Constructed of cement block, it was finished on the inside with wainscoting and plaster. The most striking feature was the large arched windows, which gave a hint of Gothic architecture. The cement blocks were left a natural gray, but gables, doors, and window frames were painted white. It was a handsome structure and could seat 180 people. Ministers of all denominations would come by boat from the mainland and conduct services. There was no formal organization. A few of the faithful locals gathered Sunday mornings, read the lessons, sang hymns, and prayed without a preacher or organist. When a minister or organist was available, the small sanctuary would overflow with worshipers. In bad weather, few came. Above the vestibule was a belfry and short steeple. Elaborate hanging oil lamps were used for evening services. The chimney blackened as breezes wafted through the open windows, causing the lamps to smoke. Attending church was not popular with vacationers or fishermen. Mrs. Mabel Bean, wife of the general manager of the development company, would write times for services on the sidewalk with chalk and sometimes drew rough illustrations. Watching from her window, she observed passers-by reading her messages. From 1922 to 1924, Sunday school was held, and an evangelistic club from Bradenton supplied speakers for worship services. Mrs. Clyde Phelps, one of the early island school teachers who was a member of a Bradenton church, was concerned over the lack of religious education of the island children. In 1925, she held afternoon Sunday school classes that flourished. This was the time of the Florida real estate boom, and all services were well attended. In the late 20s, the boom burst, and economic depression set in. Many residents were unable to remain on the island. Church services were intermittent, and then the building was abandoned. The dense jungle took over, and in time the quaint building was almost obscured from view. In 1930, however, 2 new arrivals from Connecticut came to the rescue. They were Lulu Coleman and her daughter, Marion, the daughter and the granddaughter of George Emerson Bean, the first homesteader. As they walked past the abandoned church, they noticed the charm of the edifice under the peeling paint and the unkept grounds. One day they ventured up to the unlocked door and peered in. They were shocked. The disrepair was beyond belief. Owls flew up to the rafters. Lizards, spiders, and mice scurried around. As they entered, swarms of mosquitoes attacked the adventuresome women, and they brushed numerous spider webs from their faces. Tons of dirt, dust, old bones, and guano covered every inch of the little chapel. The walls were stained and the chairs dilapidated. Then they discovered a reed organ, one pumped with foot power. The Colemans excitedly wiped off the bench, brushed off the roach-eaten hymnals, and soon were joyfully playing the rusty organ and singing their favorite hymns. In 1931, mother and daughter were determined to start services. A group got together and cleaned. The walls were painted. Electrical wiring was replaced. A wood-burning stove was added, and vesper services began. Miss Kathleen Jones, the school music teacher, convinced an organ repairman from Tampa to fix the little organ. When he saw it, he was amazed. It was a chapel organ and one of the largest of its kind. He repaired it, and Miss Kathleen started playing hymns with gusto. Dr. Ernest Colwell, an associate professor at the New Testament Divinity School at the University of Chicago, was asked to become the first pastor. It was the turning point in the life of the church when he accepted. The church overflowed. People came from the mainland to hear the eminent speaker. On March 12, 1939, Rosa Memorial Community Church became a corporate body in the Church Universal. There were 59 charter members. Chapter 12, the first post office. In 1902, Sam Cobb was postmaster of the island, and the post office was in his home in the center of the island. The sole income for the post office came from the number of canceled stamps. Sam was the only government representative on the island, and people came to him with a variety of problems. Some couldn't read or write, and others had legal problems. He took those with health problems to Bradenton doctors by boat. It was a case of helping each other in those days. Then H.T. Watson took over as postmaster. He gathered shells and mailed them to relatives in England in order to generate enough cancellations to keep the post office open. And on this page is a picture of Harry Ditmas, who earned the nickname Uncle Sam because he really looked like him. His mail truck at one time resembled a covered wagon. He even advertised the ABC on the side stood for Always Buy Chesterfields. Captain Mitch Davis said that he moved to the island in 1908 and mail came twice a week. It came to Cortez by horse and buggy and from Cortez by boat. Captain Bill Bishop was the mail carrier and delivered it to the Cobb home. Harry Ditmas took over as postmaster in 1922. A native of Brooklyn, he came to Florida in 1916 and traveled as a minstrel and burlesque manager until he realized this type of entertainment was doomed. He grew a beard and let his white hair grow long and adopted the traditional red, white, and blue costume of Uncle Sam. He became one of the early island characters. He brought mail to the island from Bradenton in a truck that was decorated to look like a pioneer's prairie schooner. He even conceived the idea of selling advertising space on his truck and secured a client, Chesterfield Cigarettes. He painted the slogan, Always Buy Chesterfield, on the truck's side panel. Later, when the United States Post Office Department ordered him to cease and desist because it was illegal to use a government vehicle for advertising, Harry had the slogan deleted but left the initials ABC. There's a picture on this page of the early postmaster, Janie Whitehead, standing in the doorway of the early post office. She lived next door to the facility. To retain the uniqueness of his truck, Harry had a large mural painted on it by an island artist depicting a scene from the Old West, when mail delivery was a dangerous occupation. The mural, copied from a Budweiser beer poster, showed a mail coach trying to outrun attacking Indian horsemen. It prompted speculation as to whether the Indians or the shooting mailman got the best of the fight. When he started delivering mail in 1924, he was not actually in the employ of the Post Office Department, but he worked for it under contract. Deliveries in those days consisted of far more than mail. No one on the island had cars, and there was only one pickup truck on the entire island. As Uncle Sam had about a 2-hour layover in Bradenton while waiting for the mail, he became a natural to do errands for people who lived west of Bradenton. He hauled everything from diaper pins to a side of beef for the one island grocery store. On this picture is Postmaster Francis Wartig, and Harriet Fay is sorting mail in the small island post office. Bags of mail are visible, and the little post boxes, cubby holes, are seen. Harry liked to take islanders to and from Bradenton, and they loved to ride with him. On the way back, he would delve into his mailbag and retrieve postcards to island residents. Passengers would read them to him while he drove. He said it would save him time. Harry, who stood 6 feet tall, took a vacation from his mail-carrying route from 1932 to 1936, and during this time Mrs. William Gill took over. She served the northern end of Longboat Key, as well as Anna Maria Island and Cortez. On this picture, there is another mail truck with Harry Ditmas standing beside it. When the bridge between Longboat Key and Anna Maria collapsed in a storm in March of 1932, Mrs. Gill continued her inter-island service by boat. Along with the mail, Mrs. Gill carried passengers and stopped in Bradenton for island residents. When Uncle Sam Ditmas became ill in 1953 at the age of 76, he was alone in his Palmasola home and tried for 6 hours to get someone to take him to the hospital. Finally, in desperation, he drove himself to the hospital in the mail truck. Many pictures of Harry as Uncle Sam with his unique mail truck were reproduced in postcards, and the local character was also in Ripley's Believe It or Not column. He was a favorite subject of photographers visiting the island. Mrs. Frances Wartig, mayor of Anna Maria from 1933 to 1935, was postmaster in the 1940s and 1950s. For the first time, there was an all-woman city government during her tenure. By all accounts, they did just fine. Chapter 13. House moved by barge to Anna Maria. Building a house in Anna Maria Island in the early 1900s took a great deal of time and effort. All supplies came by boat and were hauled by horse and wagon to the site through soft sand and jungle growth. Some folks were impatient and wanted their homes immediately, so they bought houses in Palmetto, Bradenton, and the farming community of Parrish. The old community hall, which is now the Island Players Playhouse, was originally the home of William Gillette of Parrish. After he died, his family didn't want the house, so they sold it, and it was moved down the river to the island. There's a picture on this page of this 1900s house when it was used as a tourist center. The structure was too large to fit on one barge, so it was sawed in half, and the barge made 2 trips. County records say it was in place at the corner of Gulf Drive and Pine Avenue in 1912. Other accounts say it was 1914. Before the bridge was built in 1922, the building served as a tourist center for day trippers who came from Tampa in excursion boats, which docked at the city pier. As the island became more populated, the building became the community hall. When the city was incorporated in July 1923, all city business was conducted there. Over the years, it has served as a meeting place for clubs and socials, as a school classroom, and as a church. During World War II, it was a service club for men stationed on the island. In 1949, an organizational meeting of a little theater group was held, but that's another story. And here's a picture of the building that came from Parrish, sits in the background in this picture. It's been used as a tourist center and now as a home of island players. Chapter 14. The first bridge to the island. In the early days, everyone came to the island by boat. By 1920, county commissioners decided to build a bridge. They looked for an engineer to draw up the plans, but could find only one, Jack Leffingwell, an electrical engineer vacationing from his job as a sugar plant engineer in Cuba. He had never built a bridge, but he was willing to try. The bridge was to span the bay from Bridge Street in Bradenton Beach to the fishing village of Cortez, which had been established in the 1880s. Construction started in midsummer of 1921. In October, a vicious hurricane with winds more than 100 miles an hour roared up Sarasota Bay. This wiped out the half-finished bridge. Leffingwell's crew salvaged the lumber and started again. In 1922, 8 months later, the wooden bridge was completed at a cost of $68,000. The intercoastal waterway had not been dredged at this time. When boats came up to the bridge tender manually cranked the crossarms down to stop the cars. Then he hand-cranked the turntable span by walking around and around, pushing his arms and chest against the crude wooden gear handle. After boats cruised through the opening, the bridge was returned to the original position by the same process in reverse. Bridge tenders worked hard, and drivers had to wait patiently, but there were occasional mid-bridge wrecks. The bridge was very narrow, and the wood planks gave off loud bangs as cars crossed. If a truck or school bus was crossing, cars waited. Drivers were afraid extra weight would cause the bridge to collapse. The entire bridge swayed in the wind in rough weather. We have two pictures here, one of a mule and a cart with 4 men in it crossing, and one with a man sitting, looking, resting, and there's some boats in the barges out in the water. Blue Fulford of Cortez said some drivers drove so fast the boards would bounce up and down. As a young man, he would help the bridge tender turn the crank that opened the narrow passage controlled by the horizontal drawbridge. He recalled John Ringley's yacht would occasionally get stuck in the small passageway, and it would take hours to free it. In the 1940s, the island population was about 800. Residents loved the solitude of their island and smiled while they waited for the drawbridge to open and close. By the early 50s, the three island communities, Anna Maria, Bradenton Beach, and Holmes Beach, were incorporated. Chapter 15, The Old City Jail. We built the jail in 1927, Mitch Davis told a group of islanders. It was July 1964, and he was 80 years old. Elected in 1923, he had served 54 months as the first mayor of Anna Maria City, and he was a resident of the city from 1908 until his death in 1970. The jail, he refers to, had thick walls made of tabby, blocks which are made of shell and mixed with mud. There were toilets, a wash basin, and septic tank, which the city got free from Fort Dade on Egmont Key. The front room was used as a city office. The need for a jail arose because there was a tavern dance hall where the sandbar stands now, and those who frequented the hall would get drunk and cause such disturbance with fights and more serious offenses that we were compelled to have some place to put them to cool off. And there's a picture here of Captain Mitch Davis standing in front of the jail, which has no roof and no bars. Most of the offenses were just plain drunkenness, disturbing the peace, threatening the life and limb as the liquor robbed them of their senses. There's no really serious crimes. I do remember on one occasion a Federal Revenue Agency brought us some rum runners they caught and asked us to hold them in the jail, which we did. The jail proved to be the best preventative of trouble. After we put a dozen or more offenders behind bars, most of the violations stopped. Spending a night in the open air, being bitten by thousands of mosquitoes, they made sure they didn't land in jail again. To be sure, nobody could tunnel their way out of the jail. I put 3 feet of concrete underneath the floor. At that time, the city was governed by 3 commissioners. Being the mayor, I was one. C.W. Boehm was a commissioner, and Harry Ditmas was city clerk and commissioner. Once Harry came to me in great trouble. "Lock me up," he pleaded. "Harry, you must be kidding," I replied. "No," he answered, "my wife is after me with an ice pick." He slept in the jail 3 nights until things at home cooled down. There are some pictures here of the day the jail burned, with a small group standing and watching the wooden roof burning completely off. And there's another one of the way it has been fixed with the air conditioning and the way it appeared in Ripley's Believe It or Not and on postcards. We once did confine overnight a big, strong, drunken offender. With his bare hands, he bent 2 bars apart, but not wide enough to allow him to escape. During the Repression years, when drinkers and speeders ran out of gas, there was no longer a need for the jail. In the 1940s, the jail went up in smoke during a strong windstorm, and no fire equipment was available. Harry Varley, founder of the Islander in the 1950s, had an idea of using the burnt-out building as a tourist attraction. He convinced the city commissioners to let it stand and published it in his paper. Reproduction of the jail had appeared in Ripley's Believe It or Not columns and many newspapers and magazines. Hundreds of postcards featuring the jail have been mailed across the country. The landmark still is a favorite spot for photographers. Chapter 16. The Bradenton Beach Pavilion. In the 1920s, a group of men bought a number of beachfront lots with plans to build a bathhouse in Bradenton Beach. But before they could start construction, the hurricane of 1921 hit. It sucked their lots out to sea. Their assets eroded, so they bought more lots and held their breath. In the winter of 1922, construction started. Building materials were hauled over the partially completed Cortez Bridge. Mules hauled logs through the soft sand along what's now Bridge Street. In April of 1922, the Bradenton Beach Pavilion, which cost about $30,000 to build, opened for business. It was a smashing success. The 2-story center was flanked with wings housing locker facilities. Each side had 100 lockers where bathers could change from street clothes to bathing attire, and in those days bathing suits were made of wool. The pavilion's center portion had a dance floor, dining facilities, and a porch that fronted on the Gulf. A day at the beach was a treat when you went to the pavilion. About a year after opening, the pavilion burned down. It was insured for $10,000. The owners started over again and built another pavilion for $40,000. The design was similar to the original, but it didn't have the owners' luxury apartments on the second floor. It was extremely popular, and the owners were delighted to gross as much as $1,500 a day. The pavilion's boom continued through 1925, but when Florida's boom went bust, the pavilion's glory days were over. In 1929, it caught fire again, leaving only memories of the high old time in Bradenton Beach. There are 2 pictures. There's one of the pavilion when it had just been completed, and then there's one with all the swimmers and activity all around it. It says that some people called it a casino. Chapter 17, The Haunted House of Bradenton Beach. Many want to know, where's the Haunted House of Bradenton Beach? It was built in 1922 at the Gulf end of 11th Street North. The large weathered frame structure with 18 rooms was known as the Curry Mansion. Island legends abound about the ghosts and strange happenings in the 3-story house. One legend brings to life one of Bradenton Beach's most famous couples, Captain Henry Curry and Estrelita, his wife-to-be. In 1853, young Estorita boarded a ship out of Virginia headed for Anna Maria Island to marry her childhood sweetheart, Captain Curry, whom she had not seen for several years. As the ship sailed toward port, it was hit by a sudden violent squall and sank. Searchers never found Estrelita's body. Those who claim to have seen her ghost say that she wore a light gray ankle-length traveling suit, fashionable in the mid-1800s. She always carried a small bouquet of orange blossoms, stronger and sweeter than any earthly bloom. For its first 33 years, the house was occupied only on weekends and holidays. For the next 13, it stood vacant. Only 4 families lived in the house. Next to move into the house were the ghosts of a child and her dog. The Marquette family had driven from Syracuse, New York, to spend a vacation on the island during the Depression. As the family strolled along the beach, Maria and Domino, the dog, ran ahead, close to the foamy surf. When the parents looked up, Maria was gone. Both she and the dog had been swept away by the tide. In the 40s, the Odom family bought it from the Curry family. A month was the longest they stayed, but they claimed they saw no ghosts. The most difficult phenomenon to explain is Kelly Kinney. She's the only ghost in the house who's spoken. She came straight from Ireland, which might account for her talkativeness. Kelly claims she was the first wife of Glenn Thomason, the most recent owner, whom he married in 1864. If you believe Kelly, then you'll have to believe Glenn is the reincarnation of a fighting Irishman. It was Kelly who predicted Camille would be a damaging hurricane, but would not hit the island, and she was right. Glenn, a psychologist who was writing a book, and his wife Romaine, moved from Florida's East Coast and were immediately interested in the house. They went to the island realtor, Francis Livingston. "You won't like it," the reluctant realtor told the couple. "I've shown this house to 175 people, and I've given up." Glenn liked the spaciousness and the Gulf Shore location. The ground floor was perfect for the gift shop Romaine planned to open. The second floor had 9 rooms and a large porch overlooking the Gulf. The third floor, the strangest, had 2 bedrooms with a bath between. These rooms were all made of cypress. They held the original antique furniture where the first owner had placed it. In an interview, they reported there was a ghost that threw tantrums, smashed things, rearranged objects, wore perfume, and was obviously jealous of women. The ghostly manifestations usually occurred around 3 in the morning. A whiff of cheap perfume would waken them. Several times things were broken and furnishings would be moved. "Perhaps she's not only disturbed by the changes we made," Glenn suggested. "I think she's jealous of Romaine because of all her golden statues and art treasures." On the night they moved in, Romaine said she almost fled back out. "Our dogs refused to come in. They kept pulling back and whining. We finally had to carry them in. Gigi, one of the poodles, whimpered all night, and the other was cringing and shaking. They didn't sleep a wink, and neither did I." "We rummaged around and found lots of candles, although the electricity was supposed to have been turned on," Glenn said. "We moved our clothes using a flashlight, and then we noticed a long table was set for 8. A smaller table on the upper screen porch was also set. It was as if someone had decided to leave suddenly without eating." "And the closets," Romaine added. "They were full of women's dresses rotting on the hangers, dozens of them. We couldn't understand because when we looked at the house on 2 different occasions, they weren't there. The dresses were real enough, long out of style and a little on the garish side." Romaine talked to Mrs. Odom, the previous owner, and she had no explanation for the dresses. "I took all my dresses home each time we were there, and there were no clothing in the closet when we left the house for the last time." The Thomason's son, Jer, said the first night he came to live in the house, he was awakened in the middle of the night by a ghostly figure leaning over his bed. I couldn't make out a face or any detail, just a shape, a woman's shape in the air above me, like someone was leaning over to see me, to see if I was okay. Then it disappeared. One evening, the Thomasons gave a cocktail party for a few friends to celebrate the opening of Romaine's little import shop. About 7:30, Bill Nagel of Siesta Key went into the bathroom. All of a sudden, he came running out with his right thumb bleeding. "What kind of a bathroom have you got?" he yelled. "Somebody jerked the toilet seat right out of my hand when I started to lift it. It flew up in the air, sailed around my head, conked me on the forehead, and then came down and smashed my thumb. It was like someone had hurled it. Someone who was plenty riled up." Romaine said the lights acted strange at times. They'd die down and flicker and then come back on again. The gas does the same thing. It's hard to cook. The water does it too, but that's controlled by electricity. We have a natural flowing well and pump. Sometimes when the lights go out, we can see lights in our neighbors' houses, so it's not happening anyplace else. We've had utility men here so many times I'm embarrassed to call them anymore. They can't find anything wrong. The old house came safely through at least 8 hurricanes, some of them major, and 1 tidal wave, with no apparent danger. Damage over the surrounding area was extensive. Since the house is located where few homes escape the fury of tropical storms along the Gulf coastline, it's a miracle that this house remains untouched, as if protected by some mysterious force or entity. There's something strange about the 3rd floor of the house. Strange, glowing lights, like hundreds of candles, have been observed, always at 3 o'clock in the morning. These lights have been seen by others traveling along Gulf Drive and by mariners cruising along the Gulf. Strangers have stopped to ask if anything was wrong, but when the Thomasons check, the 3rd floor lights are out. An acquaintance who is a psychic said, "I feel there may have been a tragic occurrence. I keep seeing a body thrown into the water. I get the impression a ghost lived in the water tower, and when it was torn down, she moved into the house." Don't go looking for this mysterious house. It was entirely torn down, and a modern high-rise now sits on the spot. 18. The first schoolhouse. There's a picture here of a cement block school that was built in 1913 on Magnolia Avenue. It says in the early days there were barely enough children to keep it open. And then there's a picture of happy students. Mrs. Lena Phelps in the back row was one of the first teachers, and the photograph here was taken in 1939. In 1901, a primitive shack became the school for 7 island children. Depending on the number of children who were the appropriate age to attend the school, the length of the school year varied from 4 months to a full 9 months. When there weren't enough children, the year was skipped with no school. Then there were 2 grades. Miss Gertrude Bayer was the first teacher, and later Miss Mattie Cobb taught. The school was built south of Sam Cobb's house on Rurik Cobb's property in the center of the island. As the Beach Development Company got rolling, a schoolroom was rented in what was then called the Glass House on the Gulf at Magnolia Avenue, now owned by the Adams family. On October the 1st, 1913, the Anna Maria Beach Development Company gave the Manatee County School Board 2 lots on Magnolia Avenue, and the school board constructed with J.B. Rogers, father of Mrs. Clyde Phelps, who would later become principal of the modern elementary school, to build a 1-room schoolhouse. The first teacher in the new school was Mrs. Barbie, who came to the island as a private tutor. She liked the island, and when asked to take over the public school, she said yes, on the condition the salary be raised to $50 a month. After some haggling, the school board agreed. During the next 10 years, the school board acquired more land. Teachers came and went. During the time of the Florida boom in the early 20s, things got so hectic it was sometimes necessary to add a second teacher at the height of the season. In 1925, there were 40 students. And there's a picture of 1940 with Mrs. Betty Blackburn. It says she loved all of her students. In addition to academics, she taught them to enjoy nature and sports. Section 3, Notable Residents. There's a picture here. It says squatters. Many of the early settlers grew some of the best crops in the state and shipped them out. Crates of pineapples, bushels of figs, grapefruit, and bananas were exported. One year, Sam Cobb made the first shipment of watermelons from Manatee County. Cabbages, tomatoes, eggplants, beans, and other crops were grown to perfection on the island. In the above picture, Andre Old Man Gowanlock and his friend were farmers. Gowanlock was one of the oldest living inhabitants of Manatee County. He died at the age of 103. Chapter 19, Jack Holmes, Developer Extraordinaire. In 1925, Jack Holmes fell in love with the island of Anna Maria. At the age of 36, he was in charge of the New Jersey construction firm with projects from New York to Florida. While working on Davis Island in Tampa, Jack took an excursion boat to Anna Maria. As he strolled across the island, Jack was enthralled with what he saw. He decided that this is where he wanted to live. Anna Maria City had been incorporated 2 years before, and the future looked good. Jack gave up his job and stayed in Anna Maria for several years, serving as city commissioner in 1927. Signs of the crash of 1929 were soon imminent, and he realized it was not the time to risk his family's fortune. He returned to New Jersey. His wife became ill and died, leaving him with 2 sons, ages 5 and 7. He went back to his old job. Soon he was sent to Passaic, New Jersey on a project and rented a room at a boarding house run by a couple with a pretty daughter. Maud Entfelt became his wife in 1934. On this page there is a picture of Jack Holmes. Maud shares Jack's adventuresome spirit, and soon the family took off for Florida. They moved into a cottage on Magnolia Avenue near the beach. In 1934, Anna Maria was a ghost town. Weeds grew in the shell streets, and most of the cottages were deserted and in need of repair. That gave Jack an idea. He went to the county appraiser's office and made a list of owners of those cottages. He told them, "I'll fix your property if you let me manage it. I'll take the rent money until I get my money back." He managed most of the rental properties in Anna Maria, and Maud helped with the bookkeeping. In 1936, he served another year as city commissioner. During World War II, he closed up his office and joined in the defense effort, building camps for the Army Air Corps throughout Florida. At the end of the war, he returned to Anna Maria and bought 350 acres in the middle of the island and began the transformation of the mangrove swamps and bay property into home sites. A few years later, residents held a meeting and voted to incorporate the area and name it in his honor, Holmes Beach. Right away, he decided it would be appropriate to move the family into his namesake city. Chapter 20, Annie Silver, Early Pioneer. There's a picture on this page of realtor Annie Silver looking over plans with builder Bob Pettit, who built the original Dick Wagner real estate office in Bradenton Beach. Annie Silver was a Renaissance woman. Born October the 2nd, 1874 in Mount Union, Pennsylvania, she married Charles Silver in 1911. They were both nurses and active during the major flu epidemic in Pittsburgh. She did private duty nursing during those years and also helped as a private detective. In the early 1920s, they moved to Florida with 2 of their 4 daughters and bought property in Bradenton. She had a Model T Ford and was the first private citizen to drive a car across the bridge in 1922 during the formal opening of this first link to the mainland. Annie was drawn to the real estate market. Unfortunately, she lost most of their money in the real estate crash. In the early 1930s, she operated a taxi in Bradenton. She was always fascinated with cars and was an excellent driver. She'd meet people at the train station and take them to hotels. During their stay, she would offer to drive them on day trips to attractions like Bok Tower and Cypress Gardens. Travelers were amazed to see a woman taxi driver. She started wearing slacks with matching jackets, also amazing. People rarely saw her in a dress from that time on. In the mid-30s, she sold her taxi business and bought property in Bradenton Beach. She had 2 buildings constructed, a small house to live in and a grocery store adjoining it on Gulf Drive. In about 1935, she went back into real estate but continued operating the grocery store. According to Annie's granddaughter, Dot Wagner, when I was a teenager, she asked me to stay in her house alone and run the store while she took an overnight trip to Orlando. She showed me her small ivory-handled pistol and instructed me how to use it. She told me to put the pistol in the money bag under my pillow at night and not hesitate about using it if necessary. Needless to say, I didn't sleep too well that night, but I didn't use it. I don't think she ever did either. It was very quiet on the island in those days, Dot recalled. There were no banks, and the grocery store money had to be taken into a Bradenton bank once a week. Grandma also went to an egg farm to get fresh eggs and vegetables. During World War II, she served cold drinks and cookies to the men of the Coast Guard Patrol. They asked her to go out on the beach at regular intervals with binoculars and report any lights or unusual happenings. Once during this time, a writer who escaped from occupied Europe came to the island. Government agents arranged with Annie to secretly rent him a beach cottage, Dot remembered. I think his name was Jan Vartan, and his book, well known during the war years, was Out of the Night. In the early 40s, Annie announced that she was going to sell the grocery store and build a real estate office on the adjoining property. Then she added an apartment onto the office and moved into it. A few years later, I married Dick Warner, and Grandma Silver helped me buy the grocery store, which we ran for several years. We got our real estate licenses and went to work with Annie. When she died in 1958, we bought the office from her estate, Dottie explained. Annie Silver was active in all island civic affairs and was a philanthropist. She donated property on the corner of 23rd Avenue and 23rd Street and Avenue C for a community clubhouse and a shuffleboard court. The Annie Silver Community Club still stands and is used for many meetings and events. She was also active in raising funds to build a Bradenton Beach firehouse. One fellow said, "That Annie Silver sure has persuasive powers." She could talk just about anyone into making a sizable donation. Annie had a husband-wife team who cleaned and maintained her rentals, but she always checked each cottage to make sure it was in order. She would leave the new arrivals fruit and flowers from her garden. My brother and I learned a lot from her, especially about being independent and responsible for our own actions. I remember her as a strong influence in my life, said Dot. She was a strong, independent woman who was never afraid of being different. Not your typical grandmother, but she suited me just fine. Chapter 21, A Giant Shark from the Gulf, by Ron Prouty, local historian. Cortez fisherman Edgar Green had lots of reasons to stay home that December afternoon in 1937. For one thing, it was Christmas Eve, and if that wasn't enough, it was stormy and cold. A northwesterner was blowing down on Florida's Gulf Coast. The seas were as choppy and cruel as a butcher's knife. Yet here he was out in the Gulf of Mexico in his 26-foot wooden boat, pitching and rolling with the wind-driven waves. Green, who worked for shark fisherman A.M. Sharkey Goldbrook, knew any sharks they had caught on their fixed lines couldn't survive more than a day. So he was taking advantage of a break in the weather to check the closer ones, a quarter of a mile off Longboat Key's Whitney Beach. He'd stopped to pick up Holbrook, but he wasn't at home, so Green had gone on out anyway, alone. In an interview with writer-historian Kent Chetland, Green gave his account of what he called one of the greatest battles of his life. On this page there is a picture of the Cortez fisherman Edgar Green with a 20-foot shark from the Gulf in 1937. Green reminisced, "It got so difficult to pull on the line that I thought that it must have caught on a rock. Finally it began to move up bit by bit. As I pulled on the slack, looping the 1-inch rope around the stern post, this huge shark came into view. It was a monstrous great white shark, the biggest Green had ever encountered. Its steel gray body and white underbelly contrasted with the dark waters around it. The sight of those enormous coal-black eyes burned into his memory. It had the biggest eyes I'd ever seen on a fish," he told Chetland. "Even though it was barely alive, it dove down, and for a time I wasn't sure I could bring it in." The shark dove again and again for over an hour, fighting for its life. As evening closed in, the great fish finally tired and offered little resistance as Green towed it to Holbrook's Shark Factory at Savarese Bayou on the lee side of Longboat Key. "It was cold and dark, so we decided to wait until the next day to cut it up," Green said. On Christmas morning, while most families were opening gifts, Green and Sharky were preparing to harvest the shark's valuable skin, fins, and oil. A crowd had gathered from Cortez Beach, Bradenton Beach, and Whitney Beach to watch. Among them was Gordon Whitney with his camera documenting the catch for posterity. The shark's official weight and measurements were not taken, but Green made an estimation of the shark's size using his 16-foot oar. "The shark was 4 feet beyond the end of my oar. I just don't know, but it had to be at least 20 feet long," he said. It was the biggest shark that they ever caught, and if Green was correct, it was the largest great white shark ever caught in Florida waters. Dr. Robert Hooter, director of Mote Marine Laboratories Center for Shark Research, confirms that great whites, though uncommon, do exist in Gulf waters during the winter months and tend to be very large. Such whites reach lengths of over 20 feet, although 15 to 20 is more common, he said. In January 1994, a commercial fisherman hooked into one 23 miles west of Indian Rocks Pier. Its total length was 15 feet 5 inches, and the weight was estimated at 2,200 pounds. When you look at the video of it, it looks comparable in size to the Whitney Beach shark. Although Green never admitted to being afraid that day, in his interview with Chetland, he came close. "In those days, I wasn't afraid of anything. Besides, I was too busy trying to bring the shark in. But I never went out alone after that." Chapter 22, Mitch Davis, a man for all seasons. And there's a picture here of Mitch, the first mayor of Anna Maria, a builder of many of the first homes. He also built Roser Church, the houses on the end of the pier, the ice house on Pine Avenue, and the city jail. Captain Mitch Davis was a fisherman, builder, and gardener, as well as the first mayor of the city of Anna Maria. Mitch knew the waters around the island like the inside of his own home. He had brought sailing parties to the island before the turn of the century and moved permanently to Anna Maria in 1908. Davis had 6 different fishing boats and was a popular fishing guide. The last boat he owned he built himself. It was 30 feet long and almost 9 feet wide with 2 bunks and a gas stove. He launched it in 1923 and used it until 1962. Mitch and other fishermen would beat empty gasoline drums on the pier during foggy days to guide steamers in. In 1912, he was chosen by John Roser as the contractor for the church to be built in memory of John's wife, Caroline. The contract price was $3,100, which Roser paid in cash as the work progressed. The money was brought over by boat to Roser's house in an iron safe from St. Petersburg. Another of Davis's buildings was the Lotus Cottage at the end of the pier, built for Captain John Trice of Tampa. It was 75 feet long with 4 bedrooms, each with its own bath. The 16 by 54-foot living room held a pool table and a piano. The cottage survived many storms, but finally fell into the bay in 1926 because worms had eaten through the pilings. On the other side of the pier, Mitch built an ice house, which later became a fish canning plant for J.B. Johnson. In 1926, when this cottage fell into the bay, it was saved. It was purchased by Lyman Christie for $125, placed on a barge, and floated around the North Point. It ended up on a lot at 109 Palmetto Avenue. On November the 27th, 2001, it was moved to the Island Historical Museum complex at 402 Pine Avenue to be restored to the original state that it was in on the pier. As I mentioned in Chapter 15, Mitch built the first city jail in 1927 and was present when its roof burned in the 1940s. The roofless slammer is now a tourist attraction. A hotel that sat on the corner of Gulf Drive and Spring Avenue provided meals to people coming to the island on steamers from Tampa. Mr. McGriff owned the hotel. He always cooked a lot of food and would call Mitch to come and take it to the island residents when bad weather caused a lack of customers. Captain Davis was mayor when the city acquired the Bayfront Park from the Anna Maria Beach Company. Soon the owners went broke and offered the city a parcel of land in lieu of taxes, the strip of land between Bay Boulevard and Tampa Bay. During the time that the McGee interests owned the Anna Maria Beach Company, they tried to sell the community house, now the Island Players Playhouse, and listed it with a realtor. Davis heard about it and put a lock and a sign on the door saying it was city property, so it was saved for the citizens. While Mitch's vocation was fishing, his avocation was gardening. His home on Archer Way had a yard with a variety of fruit trees. Some he brought back from his long fishing trips to the Keys. He had avocados, potato fruit, spadadillas, mangoes, papayas, grapes, lacuna, limes, loquats, guava, sumarim cherries, oranges, and grapefruit. An artesian well with full, free-flowing 2-inch outlet provided all the water he needed. A tank with a power paddle and scale gauge allowed him to mix fertilizer and insecticides in wholesale quantities. All islanders were proud of Mitch. He earned their admiration and affection during the many years that he served the city in an unassuming, modest, and retiring way. Chapter 23, Island Characters. The island has always been known for the free-spirited people who live here. One of the principals of an in-town school said during a meeting at this island school, "Everyone knows the children on the island are wild and unruly." This raised the wrath of island parents who answered, "It's the Bradenton children who come out here to get wild." Old Man Berg. The land on which the Island Community Center now sits was originally homesteaded by William Berg, known locally as Old Man Berg. Abstracts show that the homestead was first staked in 1894. It was a pie-shaped piece of land, wide on the bay side and running to a comparatively narrow point on the Gulf at about what is now the end of Spring Avenue. Old Man Berg was a character. He had a house on the bay just south of the city pier that was the only one of its kind. It had a tiny living room, and above this a tiny bedroom, reached by a ladder and trapdoor in the floor. Above this, for reasons known only to Old Man Berg, was a steeple. Back of the ground floor living room was Berg's laboratory. He was a chemist and inventor. He made an all-purpose glue from palmetto that had one liability: it was highly flammable. Anna Maria Cobb, the first white baby born on the island, remembers when she was a child, Old Man Berg's explosions were the cause of much local excitement. This is the end of this side of this tape.